But we're going to start with Ferrari contracts. Now, we know Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc are both out of contract at the end of 2024. But the question now turns to, what are they going to both do? And what are Ferrari going to do? There have been a few rumours recently that Charles Leclerc might now be in contract negotiation with the team, but nothing really substantiated by anyone at this point. So we'll start with Leclerc and we'll look at Sainz just after that. From Leclerc's perspective, Sam, what's the play? What does he do here?
Well, before we dive into the specifics of either driver, my first pet peeve when it comes to driver negotiations, especially with these top-end drivers, the ones that we consider permanent drivers, they're not at risk of losing their seat, they're not at risk of being booted out of the sport, is they often have such a rush seemingly to solidify what their next contract looks like. And it's not just for, a 1 year extension a lot of the time. A lot of the time, we're seeing it more and more frequently now. We joke about the likes of Esteban Ocon, Pierre Gasly, Norris, who have these contracts extended until I'm 87 years old. And remember, I'm only 7 now. So that is a very long time that they've decided to be at that one team. And they seem to give no thought to the fact of, I'm quite good at my job. I'm quite good at driving. I'm quite good at the F1. You can wait. You can give it a few months and chill out. They're not going to replace you instantaneously. Charles Leclerc, the Ferrari, are not going to go sign a new contract by December of the year before. We're going to replace you now, sunshine. Ferrari won't do it. The only good consistent thing they have in their roster at Ferrari are their drivers. It's the only thing that continuously performs for them. And Charles Leclerc is a talent for a long time to come. We'll get onto Sainz, so don't worry, folks, if you're a Sainz fan. But Charles Leclerc is a generational talent. He's probably slightly unfortunate that Max Verstappen has appeared on the bloody stage at exactly the same time as him, because realistically, he probably has the ability to be a multi-time world champion, but he's fighting against the perfect partnership of Red Bull and Max Verstappen. So he doesn't need to rush this decision to start with. He does not need to sign a contract in November 2023 as we record this, when he's got another whole season left. For me, if I'm Charles Leclerc, this is what I do. I tell Big Freddy Vass verbally, I'm happy, but I want to start seeing X, Y, and Z, and I'm not going to be signing a contract until summer 2024. And then you get the chance to evaluate the car. And then you understand what the potential of the team is moving forward. And if we're taking steps closer, if we're growing, if we're moving on from the weaknesses that Ferrari have displayed time and time again over the last couple of years. Because Charles Leclerc would be a man in demand. On the flip side, for Charles Leclerc, the difficult thing for him is if he doesn't re-sign for Ferrari, where is it that he goes? Look at the viable options. McLaren, the first one, is a viable option, a possibility. Well, Piastri and Norris are going to be there for the long haul. We know that they're a foundation that is locked in. They're not going anywhere anytime soon unless Norris makes some kind of shock move somewhere else. Red Bull. Charles Leclerc is more than good enough to drive next to Max Verstappen at Red Bull, and it'll be a great lineup if they got them both. But realistically, if you're Charles Leclerc, do you want to be Max Verstappen's teammate? Do you want to play second fiddle? I think that Verstappen would beat Charles Leclerc. Would they be in the same machinery? So does that seem like the regional option? Not really. Mercedes as another option. Well, is it? No, because George Russell and Lewis Hamilton are actually two of the only drivers really on the whole grid whose contracts don't expire in 2024. So that seat isn't going anywhere either. And Aston Martin comes the other one. Well, Fernando Alonso, we know, will get the Aston Martin seat whether he wants it or not because he is the GOAT. And Lance Stroll physically could not lose the seat if he tried. He could, if he threw it off of a bridge, the water underneath would somehow bring it straight back to his front door and go, express delivery, your Aston Martin seat's still here, and Lawrence would wrap it up in a nice bow, I'm sure. So out of all the options available, it would, yeah, like a holy, here it is, Lance, you shouldn't have thrown that away, mate. I'll give it to you for another year. So realistically, out of all the good seats that are properly viable, that are going to get you podiums or race wins in the near future, there aren't really any available for him as it is. So this is why I say to him, you need to play a little bit of hardball and make sure that you're getting the car that you want to get. But at the same time, Freddie Vass and his team are not idiots, and they know full well that they'll look around the rest of the paddock. They'll look at the options available and go, where is he going to go? Audi, maybe? If they come up with something brilliant and they want a shock lineup, they have to promise him something good. The other option being... Risk. It's a huge risk. Ferrari are not guaranteed, as we know, to be successful, but they're surely closer than Audi are at the moment. And the other option, if it even comes close to happening, is Andretti, and they're not even guaranteed to come in, and that might be an even bigger risk than Audi because they even got a team that they're moving into with staff. So as much as it pains me, and as much as we're going to release free Leclerc merch in time for Christmas, I can't see him viably being anywhere else. But I will still play hardball. I will still take my time, and I will still make sure that the car that's being built lives up to standard. And it puts a little bit of pressure on those engineers and mechanics and scientists to work out what's wrong and to deliver something that you can win races in. But I think Charles Leclerc is a bit of a secret romantic. I think he's so in love with the Maranello and the Ferrari Red and the Tifosi that I think they could be 8th or 9th of the championship, and I think he'd still want to live out his days there. So for me, if I'm Leclerc, I'm signing, but I'm going to wait until at least through May, June time next year.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the argument that drivers, particularly great drivers, are too hasty in putting these contract negotiations together, to put these contract extensions together. There isn't a lot of sense to this. And my assessment on Charles Leclerc's situation is that he should wait this out. And I think he should wait longer than May or June. I think he should wait until the summer break, really at a minimum, because I don't see what Ferrari are going to do otherwise. Charles Leclerc's next contract, regardless of whether it's at Ferrari or whether it's somewhere else, whether it's short-term, long-term, I think it's an important one. I think it's a really important one because we are starting to get to the point now where 2024 will be Charles Leclerc's 7th season in F1. Like he's not a rookie anymore. He's not been here a couple of years, 7 years next year. And you start to look at some of his peers. What did Max Verstappen do in his 7th year? He won the title. That was his first title year of 2021. So suddenly you have this comparison with Charles Leclerc, who probably believes, rightly or wrongly, that he is in the same category as Verstappen and should be having the same success as Verstappen. He can look at him and say, well, my 2024 is the equivalent of his 2021. And if I'm not achieving the same result as him in that year, which is incredibly likely, he's behind. And it's not just Max Verstappen. If you look at Lewis Hamilton, after 7 years, he'd already won a title and he was on the precipice of a 2nd and 3rd very soon after that. Fernando Alonso had already won 2 championships by the end of year 5. So suddenly, Charles Leclerc will look at all of those names and think, I belong in that group. But when you're able to tally up what he's actually achieved, it's not going to stack up at the end of 7 years, more than likely. So I think it's important that he gets the next one right. What has he got to show for the last 6 years? 5 wins, which I don't want to diminish it as a failure because it's absolutely not that. But versus his potential, it could and should have been a lot more than 5 wins. I think perhaps the biggest evidence of this is we played F1 back and forth last week on the Brazil preview. And the question was, name the top 19 drivers in terms of race wins who haven't gone on to win a championship. I believe Harry's first answer was Charles Leclerc. And it's understandable because you think of Charles Leclerc and you think he will definitely be on that list. He wasn't. He hasn't had enough wins to get on that list. The likes of Perez and Bottas and Ricciardo all have. Leclerc hasn't. He might have a lot of pole positions to his name. He might have a good number of podiums, but 5 wins in the space of 6 years is not what he will feel his potential is deserving of. And I think you're right as well that he is a hopeless romantic. Is that how you put it?
Yes. Yeah.
It might be the right phrase because I think he is along that line, and it's understandable. Nearly all of these drivers will have grown up looking at Ferrari, looking at the iconic heritage and wanting to drive and wanting to win for them. That's completely understandable. And if you look at, let's say, the last 20 years, let's just say this century, how many drivers have left Ferrari, as in they have made the decision, they've left Ferrari for a better career elsewhere? Alonso, and it didn't work. That's it. I cannot think of a second name. We've had drivers leave Ferrari, but I don't think I'm not sure he's leaving for a better opportunity. I think
true.
He might have been pushed a little bit.
Yeah, fair.
And there have been other instances where drivers have left, but in most instances, I don't think it's on their own decision to go and achieve something better elsewhere. And so it is difficult. It is difficult. And I would absolutely take it down to the wire. I know you went through all of the different teams that may not present an opportunity right now. It does often take just one random thing to happen, and then suddenly the entire market does open up. It is weird that way. All it takes is Daniel Ricciardo unexpectedly signing for Renault, or Sebastian Vettel unexpectedly announcing his retirement. It can often be just one thing that can take a seemingly boring market and completely turn it on its head. So I think it does make sense for Leclerc just to hold out to see if something like that does happen. And I don't think the Red Bull play is a mad one. If you're Red Bull, I think you consider that. Depending on how Perez does next year and how Ricciardo does next year, I think they would ideally like to hire internally. But also, if Leclerc's there doing a great job and is interested, I think at the very least you think about it, and you probably do a bit more than that. What about Sainz?
Yeah, Sainz is a bit of a different question, a different force. And this might be slightly insulting to Sainz here because in all intents and purposes, he's having a pretty good season for how average the car has been. He's outscoring Charles Leclerc. Now, let's not act like, again, that's all on absolutely pure pace. He's had maybe a slightly more fortunate season in terms of reliability, in terms of DNFs that have been caused and did not starts, as we know that Leclerc has had 2, and a disqualification, which Sainz hasn't had. But on the other side, Sainz is also the only race winner of a main feature race that isn't Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez. Of course, Piastri winning the sprint race. So, he's doing his own bit. And now I think as teammates, they're 1-1, right? Leclerc's won a season, Sainz has won a season. And the first time that Sainz won the season, in the first season that they were together, it was impressive. But again, the same scenario took place where Leclerc had an unfortunate few rounds that brought the points to be a lot closer than actually I think they probably would have been had they finished the same amount of races. So with Sainz, I don't think he has the same ceiling that Leclerc has. I think Leclerc's ceiling is a couple of stories higher than what Sainz is. And that's not to say that Carlos Sainz is not a fantastic Formula One driver, because he has pulled out some stellar performances over the last 2 or 3 seasons with Ferrari. But I do think that with Carlos Sainz, Ferrari is the best it's going to get. And I think that if Leclerc is umming and ahhing, if Leclerc's got other options, if Leclerc could go to Red Bull, as we just discussed, then Sainz needs to embed himself as the Ferrari man. He needs to embed himself as the man they can look to, the guy that's going to be with them for years to come, and the guy who could develop them long term and be a solid state for Ferrari. Now, being what I just said as it may, again, I don't believe that means that Carlos Sainz should be signing on the dotted line right this very second. But I do think he needs to be very witty and very wily, a bit of a wily fox of what Leclerc is doing, what the market is doing. And I think he needs to make sure that in his negotiations, he is on either an equal footing to Leclerc, or he gets in the door first and goes, I want to be the focus of this team. It's not just Charles Leclerc. I am important. I'm here for the long term. But unlike Leclerc, who I do think has got just a bit more in terms of potential. I don't think Carlos Sainz could be a world champion, for example. I just think he could be a multi-race winner, whereas I think Leclerc could be a world champ. I think Sainz needs stability. He's moved around quite a bit over the last few years. Obviously, Toro Rosso to Renault to McLaren to Ferrari. He needs to make sure that he's got a bit of a home and he's not going to be seen as a team jumper, one to another. And I don't think Sainz is at the point in his career yet where he needs a project, where he needs to go and sit in an Audi car or an Andretti car in the last 4 or 5 years of his career. So for me, it's more likely that Sainz should just pick up the pen and sign at Ferrari. But that doesn't mean he needs to rush that decision.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think to your point as well, Carlos Sainz, the way I've always seen Sainz versus Leclerc is, the better the car is, the bigger the gap between Leclerc and Sainz becomes. In that, whenever they have a midfield car, there isn't too much to separate. But as we saw with the beginning of last season, as soon as that Ferrari was race-winning potential, that's where Leclerc separated himself from Sainz. And I think until Sainz gets back in that sort of a seat and proves that's no longer the case, there will always be those question marks on, okay, in a good car, Sainz is good. Is Sainz great in a great car? And I don't think he's quite shown that yet. But equally, he does have an impressive record that I think is going to be valuable to Ferrari and indeed anyone else he goes to. Bear in mind that at the end of this season, and taking on board your points about sometimes the points don't tell the full story, there is a good chance at the end of this year, he will be able to say across the last 5 years, he has partnered Lando Norris for 2 years and Charles Leclerc for 3 years, and he's 4-1 against them collectively. That's pretty good. That is a good thing to hold your hat on. And yeah, there might be mitigating circumstances about Norris not being as good as he is now and Leclerc having bad luck in their first year at Ferrari together, but the records will say that, and that's something good that he can hold his hat on. I think given his age, I mean, he's 29 years old now. He'll be 30 when we get to the end of next season. It becomes a little bit more important, I think, for Sainz to make the right decision. And I agree. I think if he is able to embed himself at Ferrari, that would make a lot of sense. What works really well in Sainz's favour, and indeed Leclerc's favour, is that with Ferrari, there just isn't any sort of succession plan, at least as far as I can see, and not an immediate succession plan. Like, you know that if, let's say over the summer break, over the winter break, sorry, let's say Perez announces a shock retirement. They have Ricciardo good to go. They could put Tsunoda in the car. They could put Lawson in the car. They could put another driver outside of the system who'd probably jump at the opportunity to get in there. If let's reverse that and say, shock Charles Leclerc has announced his retirement over the winter. Who gets in that seat? Like, who jumps in that seat? Is it Antonio Giovinazzi? Do they try and get one of the Alpine drivers away? Do they go with Ollie Behrman as a massive risk? Do they go with Bottas or Hülkenberg as having that experience in one of the other Ferrari-powered engines? You might think some of these suggestions are crazy, but equally, it might need to be a crazy suggestion because there isn't an obvious one out there. I don't know what you think. I think it might be Giovinazzi if they needed someone straight away.
I actually would take a risk on a junior. I go Schwartzman or Behrman, and that is a silly risk.
Yeah.
But I think Ferrari would have to concede that it's either someone who we know isn't good enough for Formula One, which I would rather have someone who's got untapped potential. But I think we've said this before. I'd rather the raw speed and the mistakes rather than no speed and consistency, because I'd rather have, 3 races out of 6, you crash, but the other 3, you're second or winning, than a guy who can be 5th every single time. I'd rather nurture someone at that point. But you're right. I think the succession at Ferrari is non-existent. Giovinazzi for me is not a viable option. You have to go for a junior. And that is a massive scare if, like you said, even if Carlos Sainz goes, I'm starting to go with Audi. I'm 30. I want one team that I could build until the end of my career. This is who it's going to be. And they go, bugger, who we put in that car?
What do we do now?
Northern Ferrari.
Exactly, yeah. No, it would be really difficult. And yeah, I just think that they are in contract negotiations are as much about what you would leave behind as what you bring to the table. With Carlos Sainz, he brings a good amount to the table, and that will help him in his negotiations. But what I think will help him more is turning around and saying, okay, if I leave, what have you got left? Because it's not a lot. It's a bad hand if you're Ferrari. So I think that's going to help him out.